Where were we? The author of Waverly was Scotch. Okay, so what I've been arguing is that this has all these general terms in it. X is an author of Waverly. And the meaning of the whole thing is put together from the meanings of those general terms. So how does that work? So we want to single out this bit, the author of Waverly. And we've got these general terms. Wrote Waverly and was Scotch. Yeah? How do you get the meaning of this whole thing out of the meanings of those general terms? How do you get from this to the author of, I mean, someone said an author of Waverly, but if you say the author of Waverly, that adds something. I mean, after all, suppose Waverly had been written by a committee. I mean, suppose Waverly had been written in the Socialist Republic, the People's Soviet Socialist Republic of Scotland, and as it's now known, and had actually been written in accordance with strict party policy by a committee, right? In that case, there will be lots of people who wrote Waverly, right? Bill wrote Waverly, and Joe wrote Waverly, and Wilhelmina wrote Waverly, and so on. But there wouldn't be, would there be such a thing as the author of Waverly? Well, let me put it another way. Suppose we're having a discussion about the plight of, let's say, Indonesia. And I say to you, look, it's time that the rich country helped. Why doesn't the rich country help Indonesia? You might say to me, well, what do you mean, the rich country? There are plenty of rich countries, and they should all be helping. That's right. You could say that. Which rich country? That'd be another way of putting it. But if I say, well, there are many rich countries, what would be the meaning of the rich country? Yes?
I just want to respond to him when you say rich country. Aren't you kind of acknowledging that has no meaning to me? I need you to give it to me.
That's right. That's right. That's right. That's right.
Or you can say you have a definite object in your mind, the rich country, and you're just not stating what that object is.
Right, but that's the whole point. You haven't stated which it is.
Pointing to it,
Right. So okay, but the point is, there's got to be just one for it to make sense to talk about the rich country. Your point is, if there are many, then that makes no sense to talk about the rich country. Let me put it another way. Suppose I say, I'm sorry, I don't know why I'm having such a hard time with examples here, but suppose I say, the person in this room who can jump more than 30 feet at a single bound, yeah, that person should give me $10. Right. There's something wrong with that remark. In fact, there are many things wrong with that remark. But part of anyone's objection would be, there's no one in the room who can jump more than 30 feet. So it's not right to talk about the person in the room who can jump more than 30 feet. If you're going to talk about the X, there must be, let me put it like this. Suppose that Waverly was written by a computer. It was actually generated by a computer. A machine just randomly cranked out all the symbols, and by God, there it is, the text of a novel. Yeah, that would actually explain quite a bit about Waverly. But It just got randomly cranked out. In that case, right, suppose you know that Waverly was written by a machine, and I don't. I think it was written by a person. And I say the author of Waverly, right? Now, are you, in your supercilious way, going to let me away with that, talking about the author of Waverly? The right reaction there is Waverly has no author. If you talk about the X, there must be at least one X.
So, I'm trying to,
No, just a minute. Frigg is not under attack here. I'm making a really elementary point that is actually in full agreement with Frege about the use of the in English. That if you say the F, there must be an F in order for your remark to be correct. If I say, the King of America weighs over 100 pounds, is that remark true or false? Why? Because he's light? Because he weighs less than 100 pounds? Just a minute, answer the question. Take this example, right? Suppose I say the King of America weighs over 100 pounds. Is it true or false? Why is it false? Because there is no, well, that's to say, it's not even that there's one King of America, right? How many Kings of America are there? There are none. In order for there to be such a thing as the King of America, so my remark might be correct, there would have to be at least one king. That's what you're all agreeing. And even if you say it's nonsense, the reason it's nonsense is that there isn't at least one. So if it's true that the King of America weighs over 100 pounds, there must be at least one King of America. That's the only point here, right? If it's true that the author of Waverly was Scotch, there must be such a thing as an author of Waverly. It can't have been just generated by a machine or the random product of a million monkey fingers. Surely that's okay. Isn't it? If I'm explaining this correctly, it should be striking you as painfully obvious. Can you put your hand up if what I'm just saying here strikes you as painfully obvious? Oh, thank God. Okay. Right. Okay. So, right. If the author of for the author of Waverly was Scotch to be true, here's the general term, right? And what you're saying is there must be at least one thing hitting that spot. Yeah? It must. So this is not a term that refers to anyone, and this is not a term that refers to anyone. This is telling you how many people meet this condition. And the answer is at least one. Right? So for the author of Waverly Scotch to be true, there must be at least one person who wrote Waverly. But that is not enough. Suppose that America actually has 3 kings. And I say to you, the King of America weighs over 100 pounds. Is my remark true or false? Let's suppose that the 3 of them are all of different weights. And one of them has only just been born. Okay? Is my remark true or false when I say the King of America? You don't know? What information do you need? I'm just talking about the king. Very good. That's what you'd say, right? There is no such thing as the king. There are many kings. Yeah, that's what you mean. And what you mean is, what you're saying isn't right, but you might be able to replace it with something that makes a bit more sense. Yeah? So in order for there to be such a thing as the author of Waverly, so you might say, well, it was the whole committee that was the author. But your point then is, there's just that one thing, the committee. Yeah? You can't take it that there are multiple authors and still say the author. So what's going on here is, you want it to be at most one person hits this spot. At most one doesn't refer to anything. It just tells you how many people hit that spot. So putting that together, if you're going to say the author of Waverly was Scotch, what that means is at least one person wrote Waverly, at most one person wrote Waverly, but we haven't said anything about the Scotch part yet. This is telling you how you can derive the meaning of this whole thing from the meanings of the general terms. Where does the Scotch part fit in? We've got two general terms. We've got the wrote Waverly part and we've got the was Scotch part. Where does the was Scotch part fit in? Yep. At least one person is Scotch, okay. That comes close, right? But it doesn't hit it because if at least, suppose that there's a unique author of Waverly, yeah, exactly one person wrote Waverly, and most one, and at least one. And there is at least one Scotch person, but that nobody Scotch wrote Waverly, and in fact the author of Waverly was Ukrainian. Yeah? Then this whole thing would be false. But there'll still be at least one, or most one wrote Waverly, and at least one person is Scotch. So you've got to explain where the Scotch part fits in. What's that got to do with it? How does that connect to this construction? Yeah, you don't even need to put it like that. Because, see, that way of putting it requires that you actually have a name for that particular person. Yeah? But there's another way you can get that effect. What you want to say is, anything that hits the wrote Waverly part also hits the was Scotch part. You see what I mean? If I just make the general claim, if anything that hits the wrote Waverly, take anything that hits the wrote Waverly part, the was Scotch part will apply to that. Would you take that as a way of elaborating what you just said? Anything to which wrote Waverly applies is something to which was Scotch applies. That'll get it that it's the same thing. Do you see what I mean? Yeah. Okay. So that's to say, at least one person wrote Waverly, at most one person wrote Waverly, and anyone who wrote Waverly was Scotch. That means the same thing as this. And the point of doing it like this is, when we were talking about simple symbols and complex symbols, I was saying you can derive the meaning of the complex symbols from the meaning of the simple symbols. So this just makes explicit what the simple symbols are and how the meaning of the whole thing is derived from them. It says the simple symbols are wrote Waverly and was Scotch, and what you do is you stick in at least one and most one, and anyone who did this, did this. Yeah. And then you get the meaning of the whole thing. So the whole thing is just like, this whole thing up here, the author of Waverly was Scotch, is just a quick way of saying this. Yeah. Is that plain as day? Perfectly obvious? Yeah. One, two, yeah. The Scotch was the author of Waverly. Right. That sounds like, yeah. Okay, anyway. That would be saying at least one person was Scotch, and most one person was Scotch, and anyone who was Scotch wrote Waverly. Right? But for that to work, there would have to be just one Scotch person. And there are actually lots of us. Do you see what I mean? Does it matter? Well, you can say it, but it wouldn't be right, is what I mean. I mean, suppose I said the American was the author of The Great Gatsby. Right, very good. So if you're in a zone, if you're in a context where there's only a certain number of people you can be talking about, then there would only be one, yeah. And then it would work, yeah. So if, as I'm sorry to say sometimes happens, there is only one Scots person in the room, then you might say the Scot was the author of Waverly, and then it would work. Yeah, 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 yeah.
I understand what the point is, but it's not clear to me that that's actually the way it is parsed in your mind, cognitively.
Uh-huh.
It seems to me like when you think the author of Waverly was Scotch, that you really do take the author of Waverly to be a definite description pointing to something, and then why Scotch is right.
Okay. That's very good. I'll come on to that in a second, right? That's very important, and I want to get to that. Last one, but then I should move on. Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, very good. Okay. Okay. So that's making it very explicit. The whole point here is that these are, how should you say, how many terms at least and at most. I mean, at least is just telling you how many people meet a certain condition. It's not referring to any of them. It just tells you at least one person wrote Waverly. And take this whole phrase here. Is this referring to any person? It's not referring to any person. It's just telling you how many people meet a certain condition. And when you add in the at most, it's just telling you how many people meet a certain condition. All right? And then the last thing is just telling you how many, that anyone who met that condition was Scotch. Okay, and what you're saying is in Russian it's explicit that you're just talking about one person did this or many people did this. Okay, so I said this is very gentle. It's very important, but I want to just try and bring out something of why it's important now. So the question is, do definite descriptions refer? Frege and Searle take it as clear, as kind of obvious, that definite descriptions do refer. And that's very intuitive. But the idea is, well, when you say the author of Waverly, you're just identifying the object about which you're going to talk, right? If you say the Scotch wrote Waverly, then you're just identifying the object about which you're going to talk, right? And then, this is what I was saying last time about the truth or falsity of the whole sentence will depend on how things are with that object. That's why it looks like reference, right? That's the case for it being reference. That's your point, really, yeah? Okay, but now, Russell's first point here is, Russell's first point here is the meanings of these signs are complex. The meanings of these signs are derived from the meanings of their parts. So they can't be getting their meaning by just tagging an object. If you take something that really is a name, like Waverly or Scott, the only way it can have meaning is by tagging an object. There's nothing else to explain its meaning in terms of. But with a definite description, I mean, when I was explaining squiggle and dot to you, the only way there is of explaining the meanings of these signs is to show you the object. But if you take something like the author of Waverly, you don't need to be shown the object. You just derive the meaning of the sign from your prior knowledge of the meanings of all its parts, right? Why do you need to be shown an object? You can just figure out what it means because you understand ordinary English. So Russell's picture, the picture of the reference of a sign really seems to work for names, but with complex signs, why would you need that notion of reference? Well, when you say Sally refers to a particular person, then you're getting a general term when you say Sally is F, and the truth or falsity of the whole thing depends on whether is F is true of that particular person. And you take any general any general term, it's always the same particular individual. Whether that individual is F will determine the truth or falsity of this. Whether that individual is G will determine the truth or falsity of this. Whether that individual is H will determine the truth or falsity of that. Okay? That's a name when you get a simple symbol designating the individual, which is its meaning, and having that meaning in its own right, independently of the meanings of all other words. Okay, so that's how the name-reference relation works. That's what it is to explain the meaning of a sign by indicating the reference. When I explain the meaning of squiggle, I show you the thing on whose characteristics the truth or falsity of a remark like squiggle is made of chalk will depend. But now consider the author of Waverly was Scotch. Consider first this line. At least one person wrote Waverly. There, have we identified an object on whose characteristics the truth or falsity of the whole remark depends? No, we have not. Can you put your hand up if you think we clearly haven't, just in that first line? Okay, good. There's no reference to an individual object here. At most, one person wrote Waverly. I mean, so it could be either 0 or 1, but at most 1. Is there any reference to any particular object there? No. I mean, it could be Scott. It could be Scott Fitzgerald. It could be Hemingway. It could be practically anyone. And there would still be at most one person who wrote Waverly. Or Waverly might have been written by a machine. And that would still be true. We're not referring to any particular person and saying of them, they wrote Waverly. Okay? Is that okay? So this line there's no reference, and this line there's no reference. And here, is there any reference here? Anyone who wrote Waverly was Scotch? Can you put your hand up if you think there is reference here in this last line? Can you put your hand up if you think there's no reference in the last line? That's great. Okay. So just summing up, there's no reference here, there's no reference here, and there's no reference here. Right? So you could work through all of this without it ever occurring to you that any particular thing is being referred to. So if you stick together those three, is anything being referred to? We were doing fine up until the last point. If something was being referred to, where is it being referred to? Is it being referred to here? Is it being referred to here? Or is it being referred to here? It's not being referred to in any of these points. There's no reference at any of these points. Mm-hmm.
When you break it apart like that, it doesn't seem like there is a reference in the three parts, but when you combine them together, it's like kind of like it produces a reference. It's kind of like if you look at red and blue, you don't see purple over here, you don't see purple over there.
Yeah. I want to suggest a different analogy. It's more like putting different beams of light together to make an illusion of color. When you put them all together and you get the author of Waverly, yeah, you write that, then there is going to be some one object, yeah, some unique object on whose characteristics the truth or falsity of the whole sentence depends. Right? That's what makes it look like reference. But it isn't really reference. Reference is when you designate the individual object using a name like squiggle or dot, and then go on to say something about that thing. If I just say, suppose I said, exactly 3 people wrote Waverly, and those 3 people were all Scotch. Have I referred to anyone there? No. If I said exactly 2 people wrote Waverly, and both of them were Scotch, I still haven't referred to anyone, right? If I say no one wrote Waverly, have I referred to anyone? If I say exactly 1 person wrote Waverly, have I referred to anyone? If I say exactly 1 person wrote Waverly and anyone who wrote Waverly was Scotch, have I referred to anyone? But if I say exactly 1 person wrote Waverly and anyone who wrote Waverly was Scotch, that means exactly the same as the author of Waverly was Scotch. That's the whole point. That's Russell's analysis. Exactly one person wrote Waverly, and anyone who wrote Waverly was Scotch. This locution, the, right? It's not a sign that designates an object. It's a sign that tells you how many people meet a certain condition. And in this case, where it's saying exactly one person meets this condition, you get something that generates an optical illusion of reference, but it's not really reference. Yep. Yeah. If there was a reference, then you wouldn't be able to understand the sentence unless you knew what the reference was. If I say to you, Bill's not very happy, you have no idea who Bill is. You just don't understand the sentence. You say, I have no idea who you're talking about. I'm sure you do, but I have no idea what you just said because you don't know who Bill is. So, well, you don't even know that. I mean, Bill might be just my name for them. Yeah, but really, understanding which person I'm talking about when you understand the name is the same thing as understanding the name. That's the whole point about a name being a simple symbol, that you understand it. The only thing there is to understanding the meaning of the name is knowing which thing it stands for. It doesn't have its meaning explained in other terms. Oh, sure, you can know that a name stands for something, yeah.
Because the author of Waverly, we know it stands for something. We know it stands for an author, like the person who wrote Waverly. But we don't know who that person is. We don't know whose name is her name. We don't know his or her simple symbol. But we know that person's name, right?
Okay. Suppose you take the remark, exactly one person wrote Waverly. Yeah? Do you want to say that stands for someone? We just don't know who it is.
Yeah,
Exactly one person wrote Waverly, right? Okay. The distinction we need here is a distinction between, just consider what's happening with, this is so basic and so important. Look, I'm going to pick up from just this point next time, yeah? But I just want you to see why this matters so much. Suppose for a moment that Russell and I are right, yeah? Just give me that for a second, right? That Russell and I are right. Then these statements like, sorry, I've taken, I have to figure out the technology. I'm sorry, I've taken all the slides in the wrong direction. Okay. Oh, blast. Then, if Russell and I are, what else is going on? Right. If Russell and I are right, then when you say the author of Waverly was Scotch, what you're saying is it's not a referring sign at all. There's no referring sign here. So Frege and Searle are trying to explain the meanings of names in terms of the meanings of descriptions. But if this approach is right, the meanings of descriptions are actually much more complex than the meanings of names. The whole strategy that Frege and Russell are using is mistaken. Descriptions don't refer to anything. They belong to a quite different level of language use. So there's going to be a question, how is it that a simple name gets hooked up to an object? And we're going to have to address that without appealing to any connection between names and descriptions. So if Russell and I are right about this, then it just blows up the whole Frege Searle approach. It's a very natural approach. It's the first idea I think you'd have on coming to this topic. But it must be wrong if Russell is right about this. So that's why we have to go through this so slowly. A lot turns on this. So I think we have to stop. We're a little bit over time. Next time I'll pick up from right this point. Okay. Thanks.